Hey everyone, Josh the Top Hat Gamer here, and I love video games. Chances are, if you're here, you do too. But there's so many video games to play, and there's only so much time, and I'm only one man. So there's been a few blind spots in my gaming history. I've got a massive backlog, and people have been recommending me games to play for years. So I decided to write up this. I call it the Gaming Bucket List, and it's a way for me to keep track of games that I've wanted to play for years but haven't had the chance to, or games that have been recommended to me by others that I just want to get to. It's a record. And I'm hoping, with this video series, I can cross off some of the names on this list and maybe bring a fresh perspective to some older games that I haven't played before. Now, Resident Evil was an obvious choice for the first game to cross off on this list. It was released 23 years ago, it's touched multiple consoles, and it's been remade and remastered all the way up to like 3 years ago. Plus, the remake of Resident Evil 2 is coming out later this week, so if I want to jump into that, I might as well have some background on the series going in. There really is no better time for me to jump into the iconic Spencer estate. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'll be using Resident Evil Remake Remastered on the PS4 for convenience sake, but with the original controls intact so I can play as God or Shinji Mikami intended. Let's go!
Resident Evil.
Now, I can't speak with any authority on the original release of Resident Evil on the PS1, but there are some details about the game that I've gleaned through social osmosis through the years. Primarily concerning its so bad it's good voice acting and horribly outdated FMV intro. Unfortunately, both of these are absent from the remake, so hopefully it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the game too much. Our story begins on the outskirts of Raccoon City, where a division of the local police department known as the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS for short, have gone missing while investigating a series of bizarre murders. Murders that involve the victims' bodies being cannibalized afterwards. You know, nothing too out of the ordinary. So obviously when one team goes missing, you send another to investigate. Enter STAR's Alpha team, who managed to locate the missing Bravo team's helicopter before being set upon by a bunch of totally not zombified dogs. Now you might say to yourself, specially trained super cops should have no issue taking out a bunch of dogs, right? Well, someone didn't give Joseph F. here the message. Also, it wouldn't be long before I'd find out what a pain in the ass these doggos could be for myself. Jill? You okay there? You could probably use some No, okay. Don't worry about it. Still, now would be the time any sane person would piece the fuck out of here, as demonstrated by Alpha Team's pilot, Brad Vickers, forcing the remaining members of the team to seek refuge in this totally normal, unassuming mansion. We have Chris, Captain Normal Redfield, Barry, I Love My Gun Burton, Jill, the Master of Unlocking Valentine, and Albert Wesker. What? Wesker seems like a cool guy. Now, who actually joins you in the Spencer estate depends on which playable character you picked, automatically giving the game some added incentive to replay it at least once. With Chris, who I picked first, you enter the mansion with Wesker and Valentine but join up with other characters along the way. With Jill, you enter with Barry and Wesker, but Wesker soon fucks off to do cool guy stuff. You know how it is. So for the most part, I'll be referring to Chris's run through the game since I'm still only partway through my Jill playthrough, but for the most part they follow the same beats. Like I said, there's a character you run into later in Chris's story that doesn't appear for Jill, and there are some slight gameplay differences in terms of weapon variety and power, as well as Jill's holy lockpick, but the story remains mostly the same, so yeah, whatever. So literally less than a few steps into the mansion, Wesker suggests we split up. Usually I'd disagree, but Wesker is such a cool guy, how can I say no? Off I go then. Getting hands on with the gameplay, my first thought is that it controls surprisingly well, even with the classic tank controls. It takes a bit of getting used to, and moving anywhere was a slog until my dumbass realized there was a dedicated run button, but after a while it really feels like second nature. I mean, sure, Chris and Jill have turning circles the size of a small car, but for what the game is trying to do, that is, deliver a tense and somewhat awkward experience, I think it works surprisingly well. Not 2 rooms in and we come across our first zombie, midway through a delicious meal of succulent Bravo team meat. And what an introduction! The shaking body of what used to be Kenneth, the awfully wet sounds of zombie teeth against flesh and organs, and the slow turn as it stares you down. For a game series that you could confidently say is all about killing zombies, it introduces its first one with a lot of reverence, and I appreciate that. I even went back and had a look at the original, and despite its visual shortcomings, or in fact because of those visual shortcomings, it's still creepy as hell. So it's go time, right? Chris has a knife, he can do this. Nope! I got my shit ruined by this first guy pretty quickly, meaning I had to restart the game because it doesn't autosave. Why would I assume that it would autosave? Seems I've got some modern gaming habits to break. But that's cool, I'm up for it. Now, after restarting the story and reaching poor Kenneth again, it's time to run to my friendos, who have ditched me. God damn it. At least they left me a gun. Now, time to save, and I don't hate the lack of autosaves. Obviously, it's a feature that was added to games over time, so it's more authentic to be missing it here, but also putting the onus on the player to not only remember to save, but also manage their save-related items across the length of the game adds to the tension. And it's a horror game. Tension is fucking paramount, right? Actually, on the subject of tension, I really love the use of fixed camera angles. Having the game control what you can and can't see while you're in any given position, whether that be a monster or an item of some kind, means that you're bound to be on edge with each new room and corridor. Like, take this moment just after you pick up your first defensive dagger. You go to turn a corner, but you can't see any threat thanks to the fixed camera angle. Then you get Chris stumbling back, surprised to see a zombie right up in his face, just like you are. It'd be so difficult pulling something like that off in a third-person game where you have full camera control, and the game wouldn't be able to do as much cool mirror shit as it does either. The fixed camera angles also force you to search practically every corner of the mansion for yourself too. And what a mansion! This place is huge! From dimly lit studies to some of the Spencer Estate's more unconventional rooms, to the tight maze of corridors and staircases that connect them all, this entire area is fantastic. The pre-rendered backgrounds are surprisingly detailed, but beyond that, each room either has some sort of interesting feature or key item to be found, and the entire zone is super memorable as a result. To be honest, that's also probably helped along by the amount of back and forth you'll be doing if you go in blind, like me. So beyond avoiding and or shooting zombies, my main takeaway from Resident Evil has been that Spencer, despite not actually showing up in the game, must be fucking nuts, because he has some of the most elaborate series of locks that I've ever seen in any video game. It's hard to categorize many of these as actual puzzles, since the majority simply involve you finding items that are basically just keys and then putting them in their respective lock. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but your limited inventory can make it pretty frustrating when you don't know what items you need in which order. Seriously, it's almost not even worth picking up key items until you find your first item box. And man, I have never been so happy to find a storage box in anything before. Not being able to pick up ammo or healing items or some MacGuffin that'll surely be useful later because you only have 6 inventory slots or 8 with Jill absolutely killed me. The game dangles a shotgun in front of your face before you come across the first item box, and if you have no slots open in your inventory, bad luck. Come back later. And if you do have space in your inventory, the game trolls you anyway by making the exit a death trap until you solve this puzzle later. Thanks, game. Man, even after finding a handful of item boxes, I'd often find myself struggling to pick up items because I just happened to bring along extra ammo, or an unnecessary health item, or a key item that I thought would be useful. Obviously that can be kind of frustrating, but the silver lining is that it forces you to find and remember the quickest paths to your nearest item box at practically any given time. For real though, there are so many goddamn key items to pick up. 3 types of mansion key, various old keys for old doors, gemstones, emblems, stone masks, cranks, the list goes on and on and on, and if this is your first time through the game, or your memory is awful, you're going to be making a bunch of trips to and from the item boxes. Thank goodness the game at least automatically prompts you to discard items that are no longer necessary. It's the little things that keep something like this from becoming unbearable. And while I'm still on the subject of item boxes, I have to say, that safe room music? Perfect. Even before I realized I was standing in a room with a typewriter and an item box for the first time, that soothing music hit and I knew that, for at least the moment, I was okay. It still isn't super upbeat, but it's a welcome change to Resident Evil's otherwise understated soundtrack. Aside from the safe room music, there isn't a lot in the way of recognizable or memorable melodies in the game, but the soundtrack certainly sets the mood perfectly. Plenty of lingering brass and strings, and even some intense percussion for when things really pick up. And things will no doubt pick up since there's more than just zombies lumbering around the halls of the Spencer estate, and even they can surprise you by getting back up after you put them down once. Going in blind, I had zero knowledge of Crimson Heads, so the first time a zombie that I already killed tried to give me another go, I almost crapped myself. The only real scare I knew about going into Resident Evil was the dog window scare, but even that knowledge fucked with me. Walking past once and having the glass crack got me a little bit, but more than anything it lulled me into a false sense of security since it didn't happen for so long. And when that dog finally did come through the window, I almost died. Also, screw those dogs. They are such a pain in the ass to hit, and if you're not careful, they can take you down in no time. And the birds are annoying too. Honestly, wherever possible, it feels like ignoring enemies is the way to excel in Resident Evil. But like I said, there's more to the Spencer estate than just zombies, and we find out about one of the more novel creatures to be found when we come across Rebecca and Richard, the latter of whom has a rather nasty bite mark. Supposedly a giant snake, but really, how big could a snake be and still be in the mansion? Oh, nope, not dealing with this right now, nope. I think it was a little after the frankly ridiculous giant snake that it dawned on me just how similar Resident Evil is to Resident Evil 7. Probably around the same time I replaced a wall-mounted shotgun with a broken shotgun so that I could actually leave the room with the functioning weapon. I mean, Resident Evil 7 steals that puzzle wholesale, and that game is similarly about exploring a single, memorable location for the most part. It has plenty of locked doors with an array of esoteric keys to find. You could be exploring down one branch of the area before accidentally circling back to somewhere familiar. 7's control scheme and perspective might have changed a lot, but I think it shares a lot in common with that original Resident Evil. More than 4, 5, or 6 for sure. I will say, after the broken shotgun puzzle, Resident Evil goes back to that well a few too many times. There's at least 2 instances I can think of off the top of my head that require you to replace a genuine item with a fake or broken version of it. There is an opportunity for 2 really cool puzzles, specifically the piano-operated secret passage and one situation that requires the mixing of chemicals later, but playing as Chris you don't get to interact with either. On the one hand, I kind of like that because it clearly characterizes Chris as someone who isn't necessarily good at everything. But on the other hand, the game just gets Rebecca to solve these problems, unless you saved Richard earlier, in which case you apparently get 0 chemical assistance. I don't know, it's a whole thing. But with regards to the piano puzzle, even if you play as Jill, who gets to solve the puzzle on her own, you don't actually do anything. Jill just plays Moonlight Sonata effortlessly. In a game that's already lacking a lot of proper puzzles, a little music reading might have been interesting. Thankfully, Jill does get to mix the chemicals later, so that's something, I guess. Anyway, this entire first section in the mansion has been an effort in trying to unlock this clearly evil giant metal coffin that's chained up to the ceiling. Why? Fucked if I know. But obviously it's bad news, so when you finally gather the 4 stone masks, because Spencer is a fucking nutjob, you better believe I went in prepared. And that shotgun really makes quick work of this Crimson Head who is supposed to be a boss, but really just goes down like a bit of a bitch. A shame, really. But with that, we finally have a new key that lets us escape the mansion and into the courtyard? How big is this property? Quite big, as it turns out. The mansion itself is 4 separate floors, with more rooms than I care to count, with a massive multi-layered courtyard attached, and there's only a single bathroom to be found. That's the real horror story here. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Spencer actually has many bathrooms, they're just hidden and require you to play Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 5 before they reveal themselves. But there's still even more area beyond all of this. There's the guardhouse residence, there's a cabin further into the woods, not to mention the super secret underground lab and cave systems that come in later. And it was around this time when I left the mansion proper that I was definitely feeling like a change in scenery, so for the most part, I liked moving on to the courtyard and residence, but the enemies in these sections are just kind of annoying. Dogs are worth taking care of, I guess, but it's more effective to run past crows and bees and— fucking sky snakes? What the hell? And spiders? Why do mad scientists always pick the creepy animals to turn giant? Speaking of giant animals, if you had guessed shark for the next giant animal reveal, first of all, why on earth would you guess that? And second, congratulations on being just as crazy as the jerks running this place. Seriously though, I never would have expected a giant snake in the mansion, let alone a giant shark and his non-giant buddies swimming beneath it. Most surprisingly of all is the fact that Richard beat me here. Richard. From earlier, with the snake bite? How? Good thing he is here though, because he saves Chris from a rather nasty and instantaneous death. No, instead Chris gets to run around for a bit before discovering that he doesn't have the relevant key on him, because of course he doesn't. But that's fine, because I think half of the fun of Resident Evil, at least on your first run through, is exploring every nook and cranny of the Spencer estate and the surrounding areas. I can't think of many other games where the experience changes so significantly once you wrap your head around the placement of items and the order in which you need them, so subsequent playthroughs could prove to be entertaining on the grounds of mastery alone. After finding the relevant key, Chris must, of course, deal with the shark room, and what ensues is probably one of the most stressful and memorable sequences in the entire game. You find yourself in the control room for this aqua ring, and you have to lower the water level, but the giant shark, who we later learn is named Neptune, doesn't really appreciate that. So he slams against the window, threatening to flood the room and eat you while you fumble with the controls. It's genuinely stressful as you see the pressure percentage rise with each hit and systems start to malfunction all around you. It is kind of a shame then that Neptune himself isn't really much of a boss fight beyond this sequence. Once the water is drained, Chris can just casually wander past him, and when he gets all bitey, all you have to do is drop some electrical gear into his puddle. Problem solved. But at least you get a sweet new shotgun out of it. Actually, on the whole, I think Resident Evil is kind of lacking in the boss department. It has a couple of genuinely off-putting designs, but for the most part it's just giant animals, and only 2 of the boss encounters are anything more than just ammo sponges. Take Plant 42 for instance. Not long after you go fishing with electricity, you'll find yourself face to face with this little shop of horrors wannabe, who almost immediately chokeslams the shit out of Chris before spitting what I can only assume is acid at him. Now, just before wandering into this leafy brawl, you find a number of notes that imply that you can weaken the upcoming boss with a chemical formula. But when you try to mix anything, Chris simply scratches his head and wonders why his muscles can't get the job done, before having to go fight Plant 42 at full strength. Now, I get that Chris isn't a genius, and it's cool that Jill can take advantage of this toxin to weaken the plant, but why even have the hint there in Chris's scenario? I'm not an idiot, I could put 2 and 2 together and mix the right chemical, and it would have made for a larger sense of accomplishment as opposed to just unloading bullets into it until you win. Whatever. This lovely jaunt through the courtyard, guardhouse, and the rest of the nightmare woods surrounding the Spencer estate was a nice change of pace, but it really doesn't have the same condensed charm as the mansion itself, which is fine, because guess what? It's time to go back to the mansion. Man, I really get why I never hear about anything but the mansion when people talk about the original Resident Evil. By the time you're finished with your first playthrough, it feels like roughly 2/3 of your time with the game are spent in the mansion itself. It's almost more of a character than either of the game's protagonists, and to be honest, without the charmingly awful voice work, it's definitely way more memorable. But it isn't just us going back to the mansion. Oh no. In what might be the most dread-inducing FMV I've ever seen, we get to watch through the eyes of something much faster than the game has shown us before, as it traces the path we just took, before we snap back into gameplay and have to deal with the Hunter. A nice bump up in difficulty from your standard zombies, these dudes are faster, stronger, and can take more shots before going down, though I have no clue what they're supposed to be. Mutated alligators? Pissed off battletoads? Who can say for sure? Whatever they are, one of them tries to kill Rebecca and we can't have that. Plus, saving Rebecca results in one of the more unintentionally funny dialogue sequences, complete with a very stiff thumbs up from Mr. Redfield. Fantastic. Though we're back in the mansion, our time in its iconic halls is destined to be short-lived, as the adventure takes us underground to a series of caves which, if I'm being frank, is a low light of the game. While the courtyard and guardhouse had some annoying enemies in them, at least they had some character of their own. These caves are literally just caves littered with heavy machinery, but there is one thing of interest down here: Bravo team leader Enrico Marini. Unfortunately, he's already in bad shape by the time we find him, and this isn't helped along by the gunshot he'd take literally midway through warning Chris about a STARS traitor. Who could it possibly be? Chris's great cave offensive pits him against more hunters, some Indiana Jones style boulder traps, and of course a giant spider. No, I didn't misspeak, it's bigger than the other giant spiders, but it's also not really much of an issue since the game just gives you a fancy new flamethrower literally minutes earlier, and you can pretty much just run from the smaller spiders that spawn after it dies. I ran out of the room to regroup after I ran out of flamethrower ammo and returned to find that the mini giant spiders just despawn if you leave. Just like a real spider, if you take your eyes off them for a moment, they'll disappear. Great. But there's even more than just spiders, boulders, and the corpse of Bravo Team's leader in the caves. This creepy, moaning horror manages to corner you in the tunnels, but she's been hounding the STARS members for some time. Chris runs afoul of her during his first trip out of the mansion, and on the rare occasion you come across Wesker, he warns you about a monster in chains that can't be hurt by bullets. So what is this thing? Turns out, she's Lisa Trevor, whose father built the Spencer mansion before being left to starve in one of its various subterranean tunnels. You'll find a number of different unnerving notes concerning the architect's family, and it's through these notes that we learn of the experiments that killed Lisa's mother and turned her into this horrible, shambling monstrosity. Although these experiments made her incredibly durable, she thankfully isn't super fast, so sidestepping her and carrying on with your business is pretty simple. But it's not long before we run into poor Lisa again. Opening up the final locked door in the mansion itself leads Chris down to a crypt where, astoundingly, we see Albert Wesker. Okay, legitimately, how did he beat me down here? There's only one way in and there are 2 keys you need to get in, both of which I had. I guess Wesker is just that cool. So he's fighting off Lisa despite knowing that she's bulletproof. Obviously he's trying to use this opportunity to distract her while I go and fuck with these stones that are keeping her mother's crypt closed. Oh yeah, Lisa's mother was buried under the mansion and elaborately chained up for reasons. Anyway, we'll just push these rocks and... Oh, Wesker's dead. Shit. Guess I better finish this for my good buddy Albert Wesker. Okay. Bye, Lisa. That was weird. Now, when I hit that point of the game, I figured the end was right around the corner, and I wasn't wrong, but for such a small area, the super secret lab is pretty densely packed. Not only that, but Spencer's lab has some of the most relentless enemies in the entire game, as well as a forced slow walking section. As much as I hate being forced to walk everywhere, I can't deny that being unable to run or effectively fight on the off chance that I might explode definitely makes for a tense situation. Especially with these chimera things chasing you down. Ugh. It isn't all nitroglycerin and awful insect monsters down here though. There's a bunch of story notes to find as well as Jill Goddamn Valentine, both of which confirm who the traitor within Stars is. Surprising absolutely no one, our traitor is Albert Wesker. Like, really, even without any prior knowledge of Albert Wesker as a character, the dude is so conspicuous. He disappears and reappears all the time, he evades Chris's questions when they do meet back up, and every word out of his mouth drips with an air of supremacy. I will say though, some of the evidence you find is pretty hilarious. Like this photo you find of him hanging out with other scientists in the underground lab while he's still wearing his sunglasses. The moral of this story is that you should never trust anyone who wears their sunglasses indoors. However, the most surprising news regarding Mr. Wesker is the fact that he's still alive, and again managed to beat Chris to his destination. I can't even. Wesker reveals that he's been working with the Umbrella Corporation for some time in an effort to create bioorganic weapons, the result of which are all the lovely zombies, dogs, giant snakes, sharks, and spiders roaming the Spencer estate and its surrounding areas. Job well done, I suppose, but their piece de resistance is the Tyrant, an 8'7", quarter-of-a-ton slab of mutated man meat with one massive claw and his heart on the outside? That's probably a design flaw. Wesker releases the thing with the intent of it killing his former Stars allies, which it certainly attempts, but not before skewering Wesker with its massive claw. Luckily, I've saved up all my magnum bullets for this, and the Tyrant has something of a glass jaw, at least during this round. After escaping the lab and remembering to grab Jill on my way out, Rebecca, who was there the entire time doing pretty much nothing,
Rebecca! Don't move.
Sets the self-destruct timer in the lab, and it's time to get the fuck out of here. Thankfully, Alpha Team's pilot, Brad Vickers, aka the only sane person here, has been circling this entire time, so it's a simple matter of firing some signal rockets to get him down to the courtyard helipad. Have I mentioned that the Spencer estate is ridiculous? But just as our heroes are making their escape... Yeah, it was wishful thinking to assume that the Tyrant went down with a handful of magnum shots, and honestly, duking it out with this monstrosity as a self-destruct timer slowly ticks down is one hell of a way to cap off the game, even if the fight itself is just another example of a bullet sponge boss. Unloading into Mr. External Heart will eventually reveal that Brad really is the best character in the game. Not only is he sane enough to get the hell out of there when the shit hits the fan, he offers you a rocket launcher. No one has ever asked me that before. I think I have something in my eye. So of course you pick up the rocket launcher because why would you not, and you blow that ugly son of a bitch away. And it's so sudden and unceremonious that I couldn't help but cackle as the game ended. Job well done. Let's go home. So my main concern with going back to a lot of these older games on my list is that they haven't aged well, and with the experience of years and years of great games under my belt, some certified classics might come off as a bit underwhelming. The Resident Evil Remake, even with the classic controls, exceeded all of my expectations. Now I was a little bit disappointed that the voice acting wasn't as charmingly bad as the original and instead was just kind of bland, apart from Wesker. Wesker's cool. But the gameplay itself was surprisingly intuitive. I've heard people shitting all over tank controls for years, and I get it. But for something that wants to make you uncomfortable and tense, and wants to work with these fixed camera angles to build that tension, I don't think you can do much better. And despite the game's slightly dated character models, I even got a few jumps out of this one. So mission accomplished. Well done, Resident Evil. Hell, the story is weird and schlocky, but that's right up my alley. I think the biggest praise I can level at Resident Evil Remake is that I'm already partway through my second playthrough. I couldn't wait to use my layout and item knowledge from my first playthrough to master the second one, and I'm hoping it'll be a lot faster. And having Jill be a playable character is added incentive to get back into it. Resident Evil Remake was most definitely worth checking out after all these years, and I can happily tick it off the list, and it gets the Top Hat Gamer seal of approval. But what do you guys think of Resident Evil 1? Do you have any games that I can add to my gaming bucket list? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Peace.